We are talking Gophers men's hoops today. They took on the Missouri Tigers and ended up dropping a very close game that should have been a win. We're going to dive into the details and predictions for Ohio State.
You are Locked On Golden Gophers.
No matter what we're going to do here, we're just going to keep rowing.
Your daily podcast on the Minnesota Golden Gophers.
However it turns out, we're just going to keep rowing.
Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
We're just going to keep rowing, and keep rowing.
You are listening to Locked On Golden Gophers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. My name's Kane Rob, host of the podcast, former collegiate football video coordinator and recruiting assistant, here to talk Golden Gophers with you each and every day of the week, Monday through Friday. Today, we're going to talk some men's hoops because they had a big game last night, their biggest challenge so far on the season, a game that I thought maybe they wouldn't be able to hang around, but they actually dominated most of the game, but then fell and collapsed in the back half, the final stretch. It was a tough one for Gophers men's hoops, but there are still big takeaways. On top of that, we usually do predictions every Friday with our co-host Tristyn Spann-Ford. We had some things come up this week, so I will be hosting that in the third segment by myself with some quick predictions for an Ohio State game that does not feel very positive for Minnesota. But let's jump in. Let's talk about the Gophers men's hoops team. And today's episode is brought to you by Prize Picks. This episode is brought to you by Prize Picks, where you can go to prizepicks.com/lockedoncollege and use promo code LOCKEDONCollege for a first-time deposit match of up to $100. Daily fantasy sports made easy. Now let's talk about the Gophers men's hoops because they lost 68-70. They led this game. Of a total 40 minutes of play, they led this game 39 minutes and 51 seconds. 9 seconds was all the Tigers had of having a lead in this game, but that's all that matters. That when the final buzzer rings, who has the lead? And the Tigers found a way to get it done. Now, there were a lot of improvements that we've seen firsthand in a big game like that against a team that was top 50 in the country last year, a tournament team that got out of the first round, and the Gophers hung strong. They played well. They played good defense. Their offense was flowing for most of the game. There were some cold sports, which was a big question I had coming into the season, is how does this team respond when they are going cold, when they can't shoot? The first response they had was phenomenal. The second response they had might have been part of the downfall of this team, but overall there was improvements. I love that the ball movement remained throughout a vast majority of this game. There looks to be an actual offensive identity with ball movement and pace and trying to work the ball from inside to outside, the different schemes and different play sets that actually get open baskets for some of these creators and athletes. Joshua Joseph was on the beneficiary end of some of those baskets. They created easier baskets in tough situations. I loved, like I said, some of that creation for Joshua Joseph. In fact, I was a little bit surprised, to be honest, that he didn't play more in the second half, and hopefully we'll see him incorporated more in those bigger stretches, because I think he could have been more helpful on the defensive end for them too when Missouri was getting hot. That being said, Braden Carrington absolutely balled out in ways that don't just reflect in the points totals. He was a man on a mission with 13 rebounds, leading both teams in that category as a guard. So Braden Carrington is finding his stride and how he can contribute to this team. Now, Minnesota absolutely dominated on the glass in this matchup. 44 rebounds to 28 rebounds. Absolutely won the battle of the boards. And with 16 offensive rebounds, it was great on second chance opportunities, but we only turned it into 11 points in second chance points. So you got to be able to capitalize more on some of those offensive rebounds, especially when you're winning the battle of the boards that big. Now, defense was tough for the Gophers. They had some deflections. They played pretty good defense throughout. The second half, it got a little wobbly at times, but they had 7 overall blocks in the game. Good on that defensive front, but only 3 steals. You've got to find ways to turn those deflections and those touches and the length that you have as a team into actual turnovers. But overall, Minnesota, I was impressed with a lot of spurts in this game. Now, like I said, the biggest thing that stood out to me was in the first half of the game, the first cold spell of the game. They started off super hot. I mean, they hit their first 5 or 6 3-point attempts as a team. They started out 7 for 8 as a team from the floor. They were knocking down everything that they would shoot. And then all of a sudden they hit a cold stretch where they went like 1 for 8 when it came to shooting, but they didn't panic. Last year's team would have started hanging their heads. They would have fell behind by 15, 20 points. And then the rest of the game, they would have been trying to claw back in, get within like 7 and make it look respectable. And then all of a sudden another cold spell happens and they're out of the game losing big. Not this team. This team held it together. They kept their composure. They kept fighting through it. They created those offensive sets that I mentioned to get easier baskets, dunks for Josh Olajoseph, alley-oop attempts, cutters to the lane, wide open shots. They found ways to get easy looks, and those easy looks started to drop, and they built back up on their lead. So the Gophers found ways to get back into control, get easy buckets, and get it rolling again, even after a cold spell in that first half. That was the biggest takeaway, the biggest factor, the biggest positive of that first half, in my opinion. But the second half, it was a little bit different. From there, they were up by 20 with 10 minutes remaining in the second half, essentially the fourth quarter of the game. If you want to break this thing into quarters, you hit in the fourth quarter, you're up by 20, and it got bad. It got ugly because it became passive. And if you are a Minnesota, especially a Gophers fan, but Minnesota sports fan in general, you know what passive sports are because we experience it all the time. Think back to Minnesota last year, a hockey team, best in the nation, gets to the national championship, has the lead, plays passive, plays safe, tries to protect the lead, and ultimately ended up losing the national championship because it feels like they're on their heels as opposed to continuing to play aggressive. Look to Minnesota football. We see it constantly with the football team where they get a lead, they feel safe, they try to run the clock out, they try to run the ball, the other team hangs around, it's a one-score game, and they find a way to punch it in and make Minnesota feel heartbreak. Well, Coach Ben Johnson and the men's basketball team had a similar spell last night in that Missouri game. You're up by 20 points, 10 minutes left. All of a sudden, you're playing more passive. You're not keeping your foot on the gas. You're not playing as aggressive as you did, especially in the first half, but continuing how you opened the second half. You don't keep that fire, that energy, that drive, that oomph, like you're still a single basket game. You have to keep that fire. You keep that fire, I guarantee you Minnesota wins this game by at least 15 points. If you keep your foot on the gas, you keep attacking like you are down in this game, or you are a one basket game, you don't get comfortable. But this Minnesota team, they've got 2 wins against 2 teams that they absolutely should have won, and they were dominating in a game that people maybe counted them out against. People didn't think they could hang with a team like this, and they did, and they were dominating in it, and they got comfortable, and they got passive, and they got protective. And that's when things started to fall apart, because if you play to protect and not to lose, as opposed to staying aggressive and playing the style that got you to that point in the game, you usually end up regretting it. Now, I'm not sure if that's a requirement for Minnesota coaching in general or what, but I do know is that this fan base is completely fed up with that approach, because we've seen it too many times, and I've been on the bad side of it too many times. So I know Coach Ben Johnson and that staff are going to look at this game, look at the tape, look at the film, and how they can adjust and approach that situation different. And hopefully the next time they find themselves in that type of situation, we see a big difference, because that will be massive, especially as we get into Big Ten play. Now, a big hindrance, as big of a hindrance as that was, playing passive and laying off the gas and whatnot, the biggest Achilles heel of the game last night was turnovers, plain and simple. That was the ultimate downfall of this Gophers team. 15 points off of turnovers for Missouri last night. 15 of their 70 points. On top of that, Minnesota turned the ball over 16 times. They had as many turnovers with 16 as they had assists in the game. 16. That can't happen. That's an equation to lose the game, and it ended up being a 9-second difference from the Gophers winning and it turning into a loss. So they have to clean that up. They have some takeaways to learn from this matchup, but overall, there was some positives to this. There was the progression. There was the growth. We were in the game from start to finish. And that is different than what we have seen for the past 2 years. There are situations that they could have handled better, or with better attempts, maybe they keep themselves in this game. The final 2 offensive possessions that I can think of for the Gophers, it looked like they didn't really have a plan of action. Now, they had some sort of plan of action, but it didn't look like those were the best attempts, the best sets, the best plays to try and get yourself an easy basket to keep or maintain the lead. So I'm thinking that's going to be a back to the drawing board moment to come up with better final situation, final game plan plays like we didn't really see in this matchup. Because if this Gophers team can remain competitive, hopefully they will have more situations where they're going to be in that position, and they're going to have something better than what we saw in last night's game. Now, I want to talk about what's next for men's hoops, because they have this schedule that looks it looks all right. And we're going to talk about that coming up next here at Locked On Golden Gophers. First, I got to talk to you about our friends over at Prize Picks, because if you like daily fantasy sports, then this is the place to be. I've absolutely dropped in a new Prize Picks entry for myself tonight with the NBA games, because look, the NBA games sit right with me. I've got 2.5 rebounds on Tyus Jones. I got the over on that for sure, and it is going to clock like easy money. I think he's had over 2 rebounds in in 6 of his last 7 starts, he's had over 2 rebounds. I'll smash on that line. You throw in 2 others and you go over, under on their totals, and you can win up to 10 times, 25 times your money, depending on how many players you put in there, and you got to get them right. But simply press over or under on stat totals, yardages, total touchdowns, rebounds, points, or so much more. It's that easy. And when I hit big, I'm going to let you know about it, because you're going to want to hit big too, because it's simple, it's fun, and it's daily fantasy sports done easy. Go to prizepicks.com/lockedon. Again, that's prizepicks.com/lockedon, and use promo code LOCKEDONCollege. Locked On College, and you will get up to $100 matched on your first deposit. You put in 100, you get 100. That's $200 in your account. Again, that's prizepicks.com/lockedoncollege. Use promo code LOCKEDONCollege. Prize Picks Fantasy, or Prize Picks daily fantasy sports made easy. All right, Gophers fans, be sure to check out the Locked On Sports Today stream. It's 24 hours, 24/7. Constantly streaming over on YouTube. If you can't get enough sports and you need to know the biggest stories that are out there, go follow us over at Locked On Sports Today and follow along live as always, 24/7 is the spot to be. But we're talking about Gophers men's hoops and what is coming up next. I've got their schedule pulled up on my left over here. We're going to break down what this could look like to close out 2023 before we hit the new year into the Big Ten season. So you're looking at this schedule. We're 2-1 so far. Could have been 3-0. That would have been absolutely filthy, absolutely great, because your next 2 games need to be wins. Not should be wins, not could be wins. They need to be wins. These are games you should win by 20 plus. And with what the Gophers just did against Missouri, dropping a tight one, they're going to want revenge. They're going to want to get it right, and they're going to go out there and they're going to lay 15, 20-point victories. I'm calling it right now. Arkansas Pine Bluff and South Carolina Upstate are the next 2 schools, and the Gophers are not going to pull any punches after losing that game to Missouri. So that should have you looking at 4-1 maybe as you head on your first road trip to San Francisco, where you are playing in Oracle Arena against a respectable San Francisco team that can usually shoot really well. So can the Gophers handle a 3-point shooting team? We're going to find out on November 26th, right after Thanksgiving, because San Francisco is going to be a tough one. So we'll see if the Gophers can respond in that game, get a win, and then maybe that makes up for that Missouri loss right there. And you're looking at 5-1 as you come back home to play New Orleans to wrap up November. So you're looking at a possible chance of going 7-1 to close out November. Worst case scenario, in my opinion, is you could maybe lose that game to San Francisco on the road in Oracle, and then you're looking at 6-2. So 6-2, 7-1, not a bad start for the Gophers. This team was 9-22 last season, so they're definitely looking to improve on that number, and they could potentially improve on that number before they even get to January 2024. So let's run with 6-2 just as a lenient, just to lay off it a little bit. I think that they can beat San Francisco, but we'll run with 6-2. Then you head to Ohio State, and then you got Nebraska at home. Your first 2 Big Ten games that happen in this fall-winter segment. I think the Gophers can split those. Ohio State has had some troubles to kick off this year. Nebraska is up and down, and we saw that last year. We beat both of these teams with Two of our 9 wins last season came from one apiece from these teams. I think the Gophers can split there at the minimum. So let's say we're 7-3. 7-3 to wrap up the December stretch. You've got Florida Gulf Coast, IUPUI. I'm not going to dump into their actual name, Ball State, and then Maine. That is how you wrap up the final 4 games after you hit that back-to-back Big Ten split. So I think if you do that, you go 7-3, you split those games, you're looking at possibly all 4 of those games. Worst case, you drop 1. If you drop 1, you're 10-4. If you win all 4 like you should, you're 11-3 to head into January. That shows you this team can be in a better spot right away from jump to head into Big Ten play. Then you talk about even winning 6 or 7 Big Ten games to wrap out your year. You're looking at close to a 500-year season. Now, I think if the Gophers play their best basketball and they learn from this Missouri loss, they can get more than 6 or 7 wins. I'm not saying they're going to go out here and absolutely scrub on the Big Ten, but maybe you can get to 8. Maybe you can get to 9. And if you get to 8 or 9 and you have 11 wins heading into January, that's 19 wins right there. 19 wins. That could be a huge difference for year 3 in building some momentum here in year 3 of Ben Johnson. So is that the ceiling though? I don't know what the ceiling is for this team. I don't know how they'll respond after a big loss like this. I don't know if they can learn from this one and bring it into wins later in the season by learning from what they did in this Missouri game. If that is the case, if they can learn from it, play like they did in the first half, in the first half of the second half, and you play that type of basketball consistently night in, night out, you could be a fun team. You could be a team that people don't want to see. You might not be the top of the Big Ten, but you could be a team that could upset anybody at any given moment. And that is a dangerous team, especially if you hit it right as you hit the March and April timeframe. So let's talk about one last thing that I need to mention from what we drew from last night, and that is that there was progress. A lot of folks out there are saying, oh, the coaching is terrible. That's why we collapsed. That's why we lost. The talent's good, but the coaching's terrible. Look, it took coaching to have the talent shine. We saw what a disarray this was right away from jump last season and how disorganized it was, how there wasn't an offensive identity. We've come a long ways, and that comes with coaching. Now, I'm not saying there isn't improvements to be made, because there is. There's no reason you should blow a 20-point lead like that with 10 minutes left and lose that game. So it is on coaching, but at the same time, there has been a lot of progression in a short amount of time. This is the deepest team we've seen. This is the most depth. So having players that you can sub in case of injuries, having players that can get hot, or if it's not their night, you can put somebody else in to get hot, that's big for this team. So if they can learn from this loss, it will be huge for this program, for this team, and for the outlook for the future. So don't panic yet on this team. Don't panic. The team showed they can play with good teams. They're going to be able to play with better teams as well. But the biggest thing is that this team is better than the last 2 years that we have seen in this Gophers program under Coach Ben Johnson. And now they have to learn how to close out games, how to win games, the close ones, the tough ones. They got to learn how to do that with this group, because it's not the same each and every year. We won games these past 2 years on occasion because of Jamison Battle and because he could go out there and close out on his own. But how does this team close out? How does this team respond to adversity? That's what they're going to have to learn. And that was the first big stepping stone. So as we move forward, hopefully the Gophers can be that 11-3 or better heading out of this new 2023 year, heading into the new year. If so, then we could have a real fun men's basketball season on our hands, and we will talk about it with you more and more here at Locked On Golden Gophers. I'm still hesitant on what the ceiling for this team could be, but I am refreshed by their play and their ability to step up so far in the early season. Now, to wrap this thing up, we're going to do some quick predictions for the Gophers versus Ohio State game. It's tough to make these calls, but I'm going to do it anyway, and we're going to see what we can get right as we head into the penultimate matchup for the Gophers here in 2023. First, I want to talk to you about our friends over at Athletic Brewing, because Athletic Brewing is changing the game of non-alcoholic beers. And last night, the game changer, in my opinion, was Braden Carrington, who cleaned up on the rebounds and gave the Gophers opportunities, kept the Gophers in the game, and kept second chance points away from the Missouri Tigers. I think Braden Carrington was huge last night, also knocked down some big shots as well, and he was my player of the game. And much like Braden Carrington, Athletic Brews is out there hanging tight, doing it tough, and changing the game. That's why their brews have been out there winning competitions, global competitions, and beating out full strength beers. And they have all the variety. You don't have to give up on, oh, I like this kind of beer. Oh, I like this type of drink. I don't want to give that up. You don't have to. Over 50 styles of craft non-alcoholic beer, including IPAs, golden, sours, and much, much more. You can check it all out over at athleticbrewing.com. And the best part is no hangovers whatsoever. So you can go check it out. And while you're there over at athleticbrewing.com, use promo code Locked On to get 15% off your first time order. Again, that's LOCKEDON over at athleticbrewing.com, Athletic Brewing Company, and athleticbrewing.com. And near beer exclusions apply. Athletic Brewing Company, fit for all times. All right, Gophers fans, we are wrapping this one up with some quick predictions for the Ohio State versus Minnesota matchup. We are headed to Columbus. It's going to be a tough one, but I do want to talk about who I think is going to be the offensive, defensive player of the games. We're going to throw a score prediction out there, first touchdown prediction, and then also a couple more. We're going to start it off with how many touchdowns does this Gophers offense score? Now, like I said in prior episodes this week, the Ohio State Buckeyes have not given up more than 17 points on the season. And I don't know if the Minnesota offense is set to beat that by any stretch. Penn State couldn't do it. Notre Dame couldn't do it. Maryland couldn't do it. And they have much more confidence and consistency in their offenses than what we have seen from this Gophers team. Now, I'm not saying that this Gophers team can't score. I'm not saying they're going to have 0, they're going to have 3, they're going to have 7 or 6 or what have you. I think that they can get a couple scores on this board, but like I said, if the Gophers have any shot, any ounce of winning this game, they have to keep it a low-scoring game. And so I think the Gophers are going to try and control the time of possession like they always do. Hopefully that doesn't mean the pass is scratched, but hopefully they are more strategic and more playing the passing game to Ethan's strengths, keeping the reads simple, keeping them quick, and letting their playmakers create extra yardage, extra creation of their own abilities. We'll see if that happens, but I think that the Gophers are going to have 2 touchdowns. I'm going to say it. I was debating between 1 and 2. I think they're going to have 2. I think that they're going to get 14 points maybe. Could they get to 17 with a field goal? Could they? I don't know. I think they're going to have 2 touchdowns. We'll leave it at that to start this one off. But who leads the team in tackles? It's absolutely going to be Cody Lindenberg if he plays the game. Now, if he doesn't play the game, Devin Williams has been at the top of that chart each and every week as 1, 2, or 3 in the leading categories for tackles. So Devin Williams is definitely going to be a name that is going to be up there and very prominent in this game for the defense. So one of those 2 linebackers is my call to lead the team in tackles, one being a caveat if Cody Lindenberg plays. If he doesn't, it's Devin Williams, and I'm not even second guessing it. But who comes in and who scores the first touchdown? That's going to be the biggest thing. Now, is Darius Taylor playing? I don't know anymore. I don't know if he's going to play for the rest of the season. Maybe he just comes back for Wisconsin. Maybe he doesn't play at all. I don't know what's happening. I don't know how severe his injury is. So if I have to call a first touchdown, I'm calling it as a passing touchdown, and I'm going back to the well. I got it right last week, and I'm going to the same player once again, and that is Tristyn Spann-Ford, because as we get closer in there and as we hit that first half, they've been using him in a different manner, and it has been playing to his strengths. He's playing with confidence, and I think he can break a tackle or 2 and find his way into the end zone once again. So I'm picking Tristyn Spann-Ford as my first touchdown of the game. Offensive player of the game, I'm locking it in as Daniel Jackson. That man finds a way, somehow, some way, to either get 100 yards, get multiple scores, create separation. He's always open. He always is. He finds a way. Now, always might be a stretch, but you get what I'm saying. Daniel Jackson has been special this season, and hopefully the Gophers will continue to build on that. If he doesn't try to take a shot at the NFL, which I'm not sure he's done great. Don't get me wrong, he's done great, but I don't know if he's ready to take a shot at the NFL. As long as he stays here, and hopefully he stays here, he should be the number one feature of this Gophers offense in the next season. Him and Darius Taylor, and there should be no ifs, ands, or buts, but we'll see what happens. I think this week he is the offensive player of the game, finding a way to get either 100 yards and a score or multiple scores being under 100 yards, but I think he's going to get it done. Daniel Jackson's my pick there. Defensive player of the game. I think if you have any shot in this game, you got to create turnovers. You got to get the ball back into your offense's hands. You got to control the clock. If that's going to happen, we need the best game of the season from Tyler Nubin. He's got to find a way, got to make a way, especially with Marvin Harrison Jr. on that opposing side of the field. And having those players, having Marvin Harrison, having Emeka, having Cade Stover, they're going to throw the ball a lot, and that's going to give opportunities to Tyler Nubin. If he can capitalize, if he can create difference-making plays, big hits, forced fumbles, interceptions, create game-changing plays, and he is built to do that. He is that type of player. He's had some slip-ups here and there, but he is still a very high quality, the number one player on this defense, and this is the game that we need him to show up the most in, so he's my defensive player of the game. And finally, my final score prediction. Actually, before we do the final score prediction, I'm going with the Ethan passing yards line because there's still some hate, there's still some love, look, I'm backing our quarterback. I'm locking in. I think he's getting over 200 yards again, and that's on a team that is number 2 in passing defense. That right there is a spicy take, my friends. If you want to come back, clip it, whatever. I said it. I mean it. Ethan's getting over 200 passing yards again. Now we'll see how much the Gophers can capitalize on that front. Hopefully it's stretched across the game, or hopefully it's not a bad second half like we've seen from this entire Gophers offense. But I'm locking that in. Ethan gets over 200 passing yards. I would say 220 is probably where he's going to be at. My final score prediction for this matchup is going to be Ohio State 27, Gophers 14. And that's a respectable score. I'm changing that. I'm going to go Ohio State 31, Gophers 14. I think that this offense is just something different. Travion Henderson might be the player that is the player of the game for Ohio State. I think he is going to gash on the ground. We saw Purdue just do that. But the thing is that we're going to be so locked in on those receivers and trying to stop them in that way. I think we might open up holes, especially with the injuries that we've had on the interior core of that linebacker unit. If Cody isn't playing, if Maverick isn't playing, this running back is going to be a problem. I got Minnesota 14, Ohio State 31. I'm hoping for an upset, but I got to give my realistic thoughts. That's going to do it for us here at Locked On Golden Gophers. I appreciate you for listening. Be sure to subscribe wherever you get the podcast, and row the boat, Sky, you mind, go Gophers as always, and don't forget to subscribe on YouTube.